to step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for our sake became poor. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. And I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. I want to know you. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether.
And good afternoon. Welcome to Searching for the Truth on a beautiful, what is today? Friday. It's Friday already. My goodness, how time flies when you're having fun. Good to be with you this afternoon, and appreciate very much all of you who are out there listening today, whether you're listening here in Central Arkansas on 99.5 FM Faith Talk, or you're watching or listening on the internet, either through Faith Talk's 99.5 app or through our website at w65stchurchofchrist.com. Pleasure to be with you, and thank you for being with us. I have with me today Bruce Reeves and Matthew Vaughn. Good afternoon, fellas. How you guys doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having us.
Whoops, hold on. Try that again.
Now I'm doing well, and I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad that you are with us. I appreciate it, Matthew. Bruce, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing good. Ready to go.
Good. Well, we got a lot to get to today, so we're going to jump right into it. If you have a Bible question or comment, give us a call. Our phone number is 1-855-568-1062. 1-855-568-1062. Would love to hear from you. If you have a Bible question or a comment, doesn't have to be on what we are talking about. Of course, if you have a question about what we are discussing today, give us a call. 1-855-568-1062. And okay, there's a question that we're going to be dealing with this afternoon, and the question has to do with the nature of Jesus Christ. James Hamilton and I, guys, were talking yesterday about 1 John chapter 4, beginning in verse 12, and that verse says that no one has seen God at any time. Okay, and then it goes on talking about we must confess the Son, and we talked a little bit about what that meant, to confess the Son of God, and so we discussed a little bit the deity of Jesus Christ. Well, okay, there's a question then about the pre-existence of Jesus. Did Jesus exist prior to his birth in Bethlehem? in about 3 BC, somewhere in there.
I would say yes.
Okay, you would say yes.
I would say yes.
All right. Well, I agree with you. I believe you did. I believe you did too. Bruce, what do you say?
I would say yes as well.
Well, that's
you
a unanimous.
Would you have me on this program if I said no?
Yeah, I would
Okay.
let you. I'd let you be on the program,
We
just
would-
like
we
anyone
would
who's in the
debate,
audience
wouldn't
today.
we? Yeah.
If they say no, they're welcome to call.
Yeah.
1-855-568-1062, and be glad to hear their position on it, and deal with any passage that they think would deny that truth that Jesus did indeed pre-exist. But yes, that we do have that question before us today, and we're going to talk about that. So let's begin, fellows, in the book of John, in the book of 1 John. I'm sorry, not 1 John. John chapter 1. We're going to begin actually in verse 1 of John 1. And so we'll kind of discuss it from that passage as we kind of go through. Whoops, clicked on the wrong one. There we go. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now, okay, let's just begin right here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Bruce, you have engaged in a couple of discussions, actually more than a couple. 4 discussions on the deity of Christ with Oneness Pentecostals who believe that Jesus and the Father are the same person. That at least they believe that Jesus pre-existed. They just believe that he pre-existed as the Father.
Right.
There are other views out there that about the pre-existence of Jesus. You have the Jehovah's Witnesses. What do they believe about the pre-existence of Jesus?
Well, they would argue that Jesus was the first created being.
Okay.
But they would not argue that he is God in the sense that the Father is God.
Right. A God. In fact, they've changed. They did change in their world translation. They changed. The word was a God, the way they put it. Okay, so they believe actually, Jesus is Michael the archangel. Michael the archangel. Of course, that's quickly dismissed in Hebrews chapter 1, isn't it? Because to which of the angels did he ever say? That would include Michael, by the way.
Right. Thou art my son. Yes.
Yeah. Then you have the Oneness Pentecostal position, which we talked about a moment ago. You have the Mormons who teach that Jesus was, the Father too, by the way. They both had their beginning point, right? On some faraway planet somewhere, or maybe it wasn't so far away, but anyway, it was on a different planet. They had their origin, and they grew up, and they became God, or gods.
And all of these views, Don, I think, when you talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses, when you talk about Oneness Pentecostal positions, are really a Unitarian position of God. And so when you have distinctions in the pre-existence of Christ, you really have to get into distinctions of the Father and the Son being distinct and yet one in the one Godhead. So I think that's where all this comes in.
Sure. You have to explain how there are two persons.
You have to either believe there's more than one distinct divine person within the one Godhead concept, or you have to deny the deity of the Son, we'll say, in some
I don't know
fashion.
too many people that deny the deity of the Father.
No.
No, but all right. And then you have you mentioned the Unitarian. There is a Unitarian position or a Christadelphian position, also a very closely associated. Their idea is that Jesus is just a man. He began his existence in Bethlehem. And so they deny any pre-existence of the Son. Let me say this, that if we were to demonstrate from the Scripture the pre-existence of the Son, that in and of itself does not confirm his deity, okay? Although it would prove the Unitarian position wrong. So let's make that clear. To prove his pre-existence in and of itself does not prove his deity, although it is a point in the case to be made for his deity.
But I know exactly what you mean. I would say seeing him prior to having become human as distinct from the Father does present problems and necessarily would lead you to believe in the divinity of Christ if you were consistent.
Because you have to explain his existence.
Right.
You have to explain what the nature of that existence was. And then when you bring the passages that talk about that into play, then you're going to find out that, yes, there is a divine being, person, would be the best way to say it,
person,
who is Jesus. So, all right, but okay, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Many people try to explain this passage by saying, well, the term word here simply means the plan of God, the purpose of God. It has reference to the wisdom of God. It's personified. God's wisdom is personified, in other words, presented as a person. But they deny that it is a person. Okay, so it's just the plan of God. Bruce, explain how that cannot be true.
Well, are you saying just staying in John 1?
Just staying in this verse right here, in verses 1 and 2.
Well, first of all, just staying in that verse, if you look at John 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and we know this is the pre-incarnate Jesus. If we go down to verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
Right. Whatever the Word was or is in John 1, whatever that is, it became Jesus. It became flesh.
It became flesh.
Okay, go ahead.
So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Okay, and that notion is fellowship. He was face to face with God. But then he says, and the Word was God. Now, the plan or thought of God would not be itself God. That doesn't seem to fit with me. So you have, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. So that's distinct from the Father. There's fellowship and communion. And then he says, and the Word was God. And then he even says, He was in the beginning with God. So all of that points to personality, eternal personality, distinct from the Father.
Right.
And I think their argument would be a lot more solid if it wasn't for that one little line in there where it says, and the Word was God. Because if it was, let's say, personifying His wisdom, then it could say that God's wisdom was with Him, and that makes sense. And then God's wisdom was in fellowship with God, and that makes sense. But when you say God's wisdom was God, why would you personify Him if you're just going to connect Him with the same exact character? It doesn't make sense.
That's
to
a good point.
Good point.
And in verse 3, to go along with what Matt was saying, all things were made through Him, and without Him nothing was made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, etc. And then you come down to verse 14, and I know I'm bouncing over to Hebrews, but before we go further in John 1, very similar passage that God created the worlds through the Son. So the Son's involved in creating. That's divine activity. And you have the same thing here in John 1.
And same thing in Colossians chapter 1, verse 14 beginning, by the way, as well.
Right.
So, all right, let's go to John 1:14 there, where it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Okay. The Word dwelt among us. All right. The Word dwelt among us by becoming flesh.
Right.
Okay. And we beheld His glory. Whose glory? The Word's glory. And the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Okay. So this Word that became flesh was glorious and the only begotten of the Father. Now, it doesn't stop there in John's argumentation. Okay, it speaks of John bearing witness of Him. In fact, saying, this was He of whom I said, He who comes after me is preferred before me, for He was before me. What does that mean?
He existed before John the Baptist did.
Yeah. Well, of course, the response would be, well, He existed in plan or in purpose.
Well, but that's also not exactly normal language for us. I mean, let's say from, and this they might try to argue differently if it's a God's plan sort of situation. But let's say we got two parents and they're planning on having a kid. Do they 5 years before they have a child say, well, we have our child, he's just a plan right now? Does anyone say that? No. He was alive back then, he was just a plan. No one says that.
Right.
He was as in that he existed
right.
before, not just as a plan.
Let me say, to go along with some of these things, there's language throughout the New Testament that emphasizes the eternality of the Son. There's language that shows relationship with the Father. There's language that shows only divine activity on his part. Now, was he the purpose and plan of God? Sure,
Yes.
sure.
Yes.
Nobody's denying that. The question is, was he merely the purpose and plan of God? And when you go further in the book of John 17, verse 5, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the future, but when he's asking the Father to restore unto me the glory that I had with thee before the world was. So it's as if the Son set aside his glory to come here as a human being. So are we saying the plan fulfilled had less glory than the plan unfulfilled? That just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So
Doesn't. So, and perhaps we will get there. But okay. Verse 16 says, and of his fullness we have all received in grace for grace, for the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Verse 18 says, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. He has exegeted him. He has explained him. Okay? Now, the only way, follow me logically here, the only way that Jesus could fully declare, fully explain, fully exegete the Father is if the Son had a close personal understanding of who the Father is. And it says no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son. So that would imply, and there are other passages that we're going to look at that go along with this, he's the only one who has actually seen. He has actually seen the Father. That's going to be the point that is made. In fact, another interesting concept in relationship to this is when you compare the ESV. Verse 18 of the ESV says, no one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. So Jesus, and many passages speak of Jesus coming from God, coming from the Father.
Don, and I know we're staying in the book of John here, but I think because Hebrews 1 through 3 has such a, it correlates so well with John chapter 1, it would be worth to go with some of the things you're saying, looking at. So if you look at Hebrews 1, God, after he spoke long ago to the Father and the prophets, in many portions and in many ways in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. And he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power, etc. So the point I want to emphasize is that he is the exact representation of the Father. So I believe what he's saying is that all these divine attributes and characteristics of the Father, Jesus has those. And so when you think about who would express the Father more perfectly, no one could.
No one.
Except Jesus. But if he is not divine,
how could he?
How could he truly and genuinely do so?
Right. And this whole purpose, as the Hebrew writer goes on and explains, he's the bridge between deity and humanity, right?
Right.
And chapter 1 emphasizes his deity, his relationship to deity. In fact, since you brought it up, let's just kind of go on down to verse 8.
Oh yes.
Where it makes the point, but to the Son he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than your companions." Now, this was not said, nor has it ever been said, to an angel. And that's the point that the Hebrew writer makes above that. But now he's speaking to the Son. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. And therefore God, your God, has anointed you. That's, by the way, the idea of him being the Christ, right? The anointed one.
Right. Sure.
Okay. In fact, as you go on through this, and you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth. Who did? Who laid the foundation of the earth? And the heavens. Huh?
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Oh, Yahweh. Yeah, okay. You're right there, by the way. That is a quote from Psalm chapter 10. Okay, and the word is Yahweh. Psalm 10. Psalm 102, verses 25 through 27. By the way, let me just pull that up here real quick. Notice what it says. Of old you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. They will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will change them. But in Hebrews, this is applied to Jesus. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They will perish, but you will remain, and they will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will fold them up, and they will be changed. But you, the Son, but you are the same, and your years will not fail. But to which of the angels has he ever said, sit at my right hand? So all of this is spoken to the Son. So did he exist prior to his birth in Bethlehem?
The Hebrew writer thought he did. And you know, when you get into these, and I don't want to offend anybody, but they're kind of desperate quibbles about, well, God created the world in view of the Son. The context clearly is showing the supremacy and the superiority of Jesus over the angels.
Right.
Okay, so it's not just in view of I've got this plan and the Son's going to come to be. It is that God through the Son, so the Son in his pre-incarnate state, being divine, was active in creation.
Let's go to John 6. There are a couple of statements that Jesus makes in John the 6th chapter that I want us to think about for a little bit in relationship to this, and then we'll go from there. And about as we run out of time, probably we're going to have to just mention a bunch of other passages for people to read and study. But in John the 6th chapter, verse 46 says, "Not that anyone has seen the Father except he who is from God. He has seen the Father." This ties us back in with John 1:18. Okay? So, not that anyone has seen the Father except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. Mm-hmm. Now, someone says, well, this is just figurative language. Doesn't mean that Jesus actually saw the Father. It just means that he has been fully, had it fully revealed to him so that he can explain to us who the Father is. That's how they would also try to explain John 1:18. But this is just figurative language. Kind of like you go down to verse 50, it says, "This is the bread which comes down from heaven." Well, okay, what is that bread? Well, it tells us a little later there in verse 51 that the bread that I shall give is my flesh. Okay, so the bread is the flesh. So someone says, well, see, his flesh didn't come straight from heaven. His flesh didn't come down from heaven. How would you answer that objection?
I would say, first of all, figures convey meaning, and it's not the opposite of what is stated. So in this particular context, he's using bread and he's linking it to his flesh to speak of the provision that had been made, and they were to believe in him and partake of that.
Okay.
It's supposed to reminisce with the Jewish audience he's teaching to about the when you read bread from heaven in the Bible, you're either thinking of this passage or you're thinking of the manna that we read about in Numbers. And so he's like, just as God provided with manna back then, I'm the better version of God's provisions for us.
Okay. I'm the spiritual fulfillment and reality of that.
Right. But go back to the previous verse that you were emphasizing there, if you can.
46.
46, yeah. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. All right. So you would, if you're going to argue that this is a figure, now I understand the figure and the Jewish illusion, as Matt was mentioning. That makes sense. Those things correlate. But you would have to say, okay, this is a figure that states the opposite of truth. Well, what biblical figure states the opposite of truth? If you're going to say, okay, he has seen the Father really means he has not seen the Father, how would I ever come to that conclusion?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, even figurative language has its point, has its purpose, it has its truth. But okay, let's just point out, though, that even if this was figurative language, I don't see how it denies the fact of Jesus' pre-existence, because as you go on, by the way, just let me make this point as well. When Jesus speaks of his flesh here, he's not talking about just his body. He's not talking about just his body, although Hebrews 10:5 makes the point that, a body thou hast prepared for me. Right? Okay, this is a divinely appointed sacrifice for Christ to endure. But when he uses the term flesh, he's talking about himself as his position now that he has taken upon himself as the Son of Man.
Incarnate.
Yeah. He has taken upon himself, as Hebrews 2:9 says, flesh, or as John 1:14 says, flesh. The Word truly became flesh. Now, this is his role. It's not just talking about his fleshly body. It's talking about his entire role as the Son of God.
And let me say this. In John 6, he's using this figurative language to just really drive the point home. And so you have these guys saying, well, is he saying I'm supposed to eat his flesh and drink his blood? Well, not literally, but even the disciples basically said this is scandalous language.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But what he's talking about is believe in me and follow me, or you won't be saved.
And I also think it speaks to his authority.
Mm-hmm.
He's from heaven. His authority is with the Father. I think he makes that point in the
Right.
passage.
Verse 58 says, "This is the bread which came down from heaven." Okay. Well, the point that they're going to make is, and that, by the way, ties back in verse 58 with manna. Okay.
Right.
But the point is, okay, well, Jesus just is sent, or he's from heaven in the same sense, like John the Baptist or some of the other prophets. You know. But notice you get down to verse 61, and it says, Jesus asked, "Does this offend you? What then if you should see the Son of Man ascend where he was before?"
Now, see, if John the Baptist was sent from heaven, was he there before? If Jesus was sent from heaven,
How could John? Here's my question: How could John the Baptist say this?
He couldn't.
What if John said to his audience? He said, "What if you see Elijah crying in the wilderness ascend where he was before?" Could John say that?
No.
No. What man could? Okay.
There's so much language in the book of John and Hebrews because both of those books are emphasizing the divinity of Christ. And I think there's going to be very difficult for those who deny it.
And John mentions that at the end of his book, John 20 in verses 30 and 31, he says, "I wrote all of these things so that you may believe that Jesus is the Son of God." And that's all of this stuff is evidences for that.
We're out of time, folks. And thank you so much for being with us today. The outro is already going, so thank y'all. Till Monday. May God bless everyone. Have a great rest of the day.